Welcome back to the weekly Q&A. If you have any questions, post them down below and let's get started. What are your thoughts on the training routines of the silver era? Steve Reeves did a high volume, high frequency full body split and apparently didn't take drugs. Is this a possible routine for natty individuals? Of course. These old school bodybuilders were natural and the majority ran full body systems. There's a reason for this. You can actually hit your genetic limit with this style of training alone. From a physiological standpoint, there's no reason to deviate away from it. Yeah, we can make the argument that it's a lot more challenging, and some would say more inefficient in some cases, but if you're hitting adequate volume, inducing progressive overload, it's just another split. So the answer to your question is yes. The old school greats were real naturals, and this is the programs that they use. And I'm not gonna comment on the exact structure because it was a little bit different depending on the individual and the weaknesses, but we know that it's time proven and very effective. And you're talking to a guy who did exclusively full body training for years and years and years. This is how I got the majority of my muscle mass and strength. Right now I'm doing upper lower, but that doesn't change the fact that when my physique looked its absolute best, I was doing full body. Also acquired advanced and elite numbers in many compound movements. This is not by coincidence. It absolutely works. And more people are starting to realize that in 2021. But truth is, they were starting to gain popularity years before that. So that's great to see. That said, I'll make one comment about silver era training. Don't feel like you need to do exclusively dumbbell and barbell training. If there's a good machine at your gym, say reverse hyperextension or a solid cable setup, feel free to use that. Understand that back in the day, they didn't have the same resources we have now. So don't be limited in the dinosaur way of thinking, even though a lot of those principles are indeed very effective. I would combine some of the silver era principles with the modern knowledge that we now have, especially if some of the ideologies were debunked. Reverse grip OHP to help someone build mobility for standard OHP. Love to hear your thoughts. Keep up the good work. Thank you, brother. In theory, this would work. Given the external rotation, you can make the argument that it's easier to complete a full range of motion rep while having your hands further back. But in practice, I never see this. In fact, what happens when someone does the reverse grip bench? They're an external rotation, but because of the movement pattern itself, they're pressing towards their feet, not higher up. In other words, you're pushing the bar away from you. And I see the same way with the overhead press. I don't see guys doing the supinated position, locking back here. They just shove it in front because it's easier to maintain that position. It's the most efficient way when using the supinated position. So that's what I think is going to happen. Hi, Alex. When do you recommend to change a secondary press? For example, I like to do OHP or dips for the second press, but I don't know when to swap them. Can I do one on volume days and the other on intensity days? Can you please help me, man? Keep it up. Of course, I got you. So you change the exercise when progress slows down tremendously, you feel like an overuse injury is going to occur, or you want to prevent plateaus from arising in the first place. So in my experience, 3 weeks is a good sweet spot when using concurrent periodization. That's why I like 3-week waves so much. Alternatively, you can change up the exercise every single workout if you really want to go balls to the wall. But for most of you, that's probably not necessary. Now, the absolute maximum, when you're at a certain strength level, I'd say 4 to 6 weeks is good. But going past that point, when you're training with that level of intensity, regression tends to occur. So I would always have a certain window. In regards to what I said earlier about swapping when you stall, it's going to happen in the time frame I just listed. So either you do it by instinct or you follow a schedule. Now for alternating dips and OHP, there's nothing wrong with that. One of your pressing workouts could be more horizontal base, the other vertical. So Monday could be incline bench and OHP with maybe one horizontal. Thursday could be flat bench, dips, and maybe a dumbbell shoulder press if you want to mix it up like that. I'm not going to program this setup for you. Just know that it's not black and white whatsoever, and you need to do the exercises that best suit your muscular weaknesses. And if that means alternating the movement patterns depending on the workout days, I see nothing wrong with that. The way I do it right now is changing it up between accommodating resistance and straight weight. And for the last press, I'll either do inclines or OHP depending how I feel that day. But I'm not going to alternate between dips and OHP. I would do dips as a secondary exercise, not a finisher, nor would I take out the more vertical oriented presses. But that's what works for me. You have to know what's applicable to you right now. Hey Alex, why would little variations to an exercise decrease overuse injuries if it's still basically the same movement? For example, bench press with chains and bench press with bands. It's not the same strength curve. That's the whole point. You're doing a similar movement pattern, a flat barbell bench press, but the resistance profile varies throughout the range of motion. And when talking about bands and chains, it's going to be lighter at the bottom, heavier at the top. Where do most of the overuse injuries occur on flat pressing? In the shoulders and pecs. Do you hear guys tearing off their triceps when they bench? No. That's why you can really push the accommodating resistance and not have problems in that regard. It could be stressful in other ways. Some would argue on the CNS. And overall fatigue, given the overspeed eccentrics and the overloading effect, you really got to force everything you got. But in terms of minimizing overuse in the bottom position, it absolutely works. And the thing is, you're not deloading 100% of the weight at the bottom. Overuse injuries tend to occur with repetitive stress on those vulnerable joint angles. When you modify the strength curve, you change the game. It's as simple as that. And that's why even adding in dumbbells or changing up the barbell, a Swiss bar bench press is not the same as a straight bar. There's going to be a gap within the weight being used, even though the percentages are the same. And the neutral grip is easier on your shoulders in general. So there's that too, the mechanics of the movement. And keep in mind, when you change up the variation, yeah, the movement pattern is very similar, but it's not exactly the same. And that's another key distinction. Hey Alex, how much weight do you think someone should squat and deadlift for a 1 rep max to have nice legs? Love from Switzerland. I can't tell you what 1 rep max would be required, especially since there's limb lengths to consider. A shorter guy is going to look bigger faster, and you might have good leverages for squats or deadlifts. We've all seen those skinny guys who are putting up great numbers. Even though they'd be even stronger if they got bigger, the fact is there are advantages that can distort the hypertrophy to strength ratio. So I can't make definitive statements unless we're talking about the elite numbers. In that case, pretty much all of you, or at least 90%, will have jacked legs. So instead, I'll make a generalized statement. Simply get out of the novice phase. If you've been lifting seriously for a year or two, inducing linear progression on the fundamental compound movements with maybe adding in some accessory work as well for volume, I have no reason to believe why your legs will be skinny. Now I can reference charts, like saying you need a 315 squat and 405 deadlift, but what if you plateau sooner than that? Or what if you can milk the gains for even longer? I don't know what your genetic potential is like. So I'll address it from the time perspective. Give yourself 1 to 2 years. Don't worry about the absolute 1 rep max right now. Just focus on progression, and at some point, you'll have what you're looking for. Because sometimes guys will have a certain 1 rep max and they look at their physique. How come I don't have the corresponding muscle mass? Well, because there's other factors to consider. It's like me. You think that a guy on my bench press would have 17, 18 inch arms. So it's not always about the 1 rep max absolute. It's what gets you to that point, the training that goes into it, the journey itself, the programming that leads to it. Not that you just have this number and therefore it's guaranteed to have X amount of measurements. Hope that makes sense. Hey Alex, what do you think about rounded upper back rowing? I saw it in Chris Bumstead's recent video that he thinks it hits the mid back harder. Much love. He's probably right about that. In fact, the weighted stretch is one of the key components in building mass in the upper back. It's why rack pulls, deadlifts, your chi rows even, which includes a protraction element, tends to be so effective. So to me, you're taking the upper back through a greater range of motion. Like when guys do seated cable rows, if they're just keeping everything stationary, I don't think that's better than rounding a bit and then extending. So you want to allow for complete scapular movement. Now you don't need a hunchback, but a little bit of protraction is probably a good thing. In fact, some will make the arguments that rounding and retracting is a good mass builder by itself, which naturally tends to occur when you cheat row. So the arms are not the major factor here. Hey Alex, if I'm having to take my butt off the bench to finish tough reps on the bench press, where does this indicate my weak point is? I've been guilty of this myself. Usually it has to do with not being strong enough. And when I raise my butt off the bench, it's usually past the midpoint. So I know that for me, it's definitely a tricep weakness. And I would say that for a lot of you, it's probably the same thing. You're fast off the chest, you're here, but now you're just not able to lock. So when you raise the butt off the bench, it's pretty much, I would say 70 to 80% of the time, you'll be able to lock it out. But if you try raising your butt off the bench when you're stuck off your chest, it's not going to work. Or if it does, it'll be one of the grindiest reps of your entire life. So to me, it's more indicative of a tricep lockout weakness. Now, beyond the muscle weakness perspective, Could also be that you're not tight enough. In the past, my leg drive was not where it should have been until I watched a video by Alan Thrall. And the way that he described leg drive made complete sense. And I've been using that technique ever since. Basically, you want to incorporate the leg drive first before you get the upper back tight. Maybe I'll talk about this in a tutorial type video, but you don't want to get tight on the bench and then plant the legs hard and start forcing. You want to force first and then lock your back in. It creates a more rigid base to press from. When I started doing that, man, it completely changed everything for me. So make sure you set your feet in the correct position before you maximize your upper body tightness. Most common injuries in people who do body weight only and how to avoid them. I would say it's overuse injuries from doing the exact same variations for super high reps and compromising form. With a limited understanding of calisthenics, you'll be running a program that is far too minimalist. And just like in weight training, that's a recipe for injuries. So I think you should learn more about the different variations, like pseudo planche push-ups, incline or decline push-ups, changing up the grip widths. Your squats, it could be incorporating lunges, box jumps, jumping squats, different variations of the burpee, your 2 pumps, 3 pumps, the Navy SEALs. You don't want to just do one workout, especially at a high frequency, which is typical of calisthenics routines, for months or years at a time. I don't think that's the best way to go about it. Slight deviations make all the difference. And then you want to pay attention to the form, not compromise it to the extent where it looks like absolute garbage. So I would say that a guy who's doing partial reps, but is consistent, is probably going to have less injuries than a dude doing full range, but he's bouncing, he's twisting side to side. He's doing all kinds of things that's not representative of the actual movement pattern itself. Finally, jumping into variations that are too extreme for you right now can lead to injuries. So in the case of ring training, you want to get the basic support skills done first. Master the form before upgrading the variations. Don't just do RTO dips because you're doing decent numbers on the weighted dip. Start with just the holds. Build the correct tendon strength. Make sure you're doing the exercise properly. And you should be good to go. Is doing the Jefferson deadlift as the only deadlift rather than conventional or sumo a bad idea? Well, it's less hip hingy, that's for sure. But if you don't care about conventional or sumo, you love Jefferson deadlifts, go right ahead. The only precaution I'll say is that it's absolutely mandatory that you alternate the stances. And for some people, even when they do that, muscular balances can still arise because they're not reproducing the exact same foot positioning. Trust me, it's harder to do than some people realize. So to me, it would be the muscular imbalance argument. And I know that in myself, I absolutely suffer from this years back. The left side of my back started getting stronger. And all of a sudden, one leg was stronger than the other as well, which was my fault. I did not alternate, which was a dumb ego lifting move. But if you can prevent that from happening, you literally do your best. You equate the volume on each side. I think you'll be fine with Jefferson's alone. You can use that as a main pulling position. And then for accessories, if you want a little bit more of rep work, do your good mornings or RDLs. You don't have to do a conventional or sumo pull. Hey Alex, do you think high natural testosterone can have an influence on the size of your neck and traps? In untrained individuals, maybe to a certain extent, so like an inch difference, but that you're going to get better gains than someone who is completely average, I don't see that happening given the fact that the natural range, even at the highest level, is not super physiological. So if you take a guy with the highest possible natural T versus a dude who's on the lower side, and the lower guy is doing direct neck and trap work, whereas the other dude is not doing anything or is running a minimalist program, the guy with less testosterone will get better results. Simple as that. If they train at a similar intensity, running the exact same program, I don't see the muscle gains being that much different. In fact, it will be more so your genetics that'll determine that. You can have a guy whose hormonal profile is not necessarily the best, but if he has good muscle building genetics, it's a done deal. So I wouldn't even concern yourself with these hypotheticals. It doesn't matter at the end of the day anyway. Best thing you can do is try to optimize your T levels by eating the best diet possible, being healthy, and of course, training your neck and traps like there's no tomorrow. If you go from 15 to 17 inches, doesn't matter what your T levels were at. You still made progress, and that's the only thing that matters. Not that some guy got better gains than you, which I don't think has to do with naturally high T levels. Hey Alexander, is it possible to get to the intermediate level with 185 times 4 rep max bench because I'm not linearly progressing? I'm 5'8", 155 pounds, 14.5 inch arms. Okay, You might already be an intermediate lifter given your weight and the fact that you're not able to induce linear progression. Have you tried increasing or decreasing the volume? Have you gone through multiple weight resets? What are the signs besides the fact that you can't make linear progress right now? Basically, have you milked everything in regards to basic linear progression? If the answer is no, then I would say you likely have a bit more in the tank, but maybe you're going to plateau at around 205. But hey, it's possible that you already hit the intermediate stage right now. The only thing I'm a little bit concerned about is your arm measurement. If they're only 14.5 inches, that leads me to believe that you're not quite there yet. You can probably get 15 if you milk the gains a bit longer. And also, what novice program are you running? Are you neglecting direct arm work? If so, shame. Make sure to include an extension of some type or even a push down. You don't want to just do compound movements, so maybe there's a programming issue. Or perhaps the weight is the problem. You got to bulk up to 160, 165. Maintenance calories is no longer doing it. You're trying to maintain super ripped abs all the time when you're at the bleeding edge of your recovery. Try entering a calorie surplus, modify your parameters a little bit, see if that fixes anything. I would say you have a little bit more, maybe 1 to 3 months max left of this type of training. Are there any problems training back 2 times and chest 1 time a week? I wouldn't say it's a problem for your structural integrity. You might make the argument that it's superior for minimizing overuse injuries. The stronger your back is, the better off you're going to be when doing any type of flat pressing. So it's a good idea to have the rear be stronger than the front. But from a programming standpoint, is that optimal? No, and there's better ways to go about doing this. What I would recommend is simply adding in 1 additional row per upper body workout, such that the volume on the pulling is automatically higher than your chest work. And this way, you're cutting out the risk of developing muscular imbalances without taking away from the chest gains. Additionally, you can supplement your training with frequency rows on the side, kind of like greasing the groove. And for that, I'd recommend you check out my video, The Power of Frequency Rows. I give you all the guidelines you need to know. But pretty much, you'd want to use a low stress variation like inverted rows, cable rows, band rows, etc. Just drive in as much volume into the back as possible since it is capable of a lot of punishment. And that should cut out the risk of developing kyphotic posture or having your chest be way weaker than your back. It's not happening when you put the focus in this way. But that you need to compromise your pressing gains? No, twice a week is the standard. Let's leave it at that. All right, final question of the week. My overhead press 1 rep max is the same as my Z press max, which is 185. Is this normal? Absolutely not. Your Z press should be way weaker than your standing barbell overhead press. And if they're exactly the same, I would say there's a form issue either on the Z press or the OHP. So let me describe what might be happening. For your Z pressing, I would guess that you're starting off with the bar here or slightly above. Plus, you're widening out your hands, which gives you a slight leverage advantage when you're already doing a partial lift. But with the standard OHP, it's probably narrower grip and you're touching your body. So it's harder out of the bottom, which is the most difficult part in the OHP. And regardless if you're fast or not, the fact that you have to put more force into that low position, it's going to make it harder to lock. So that combined with the fact that you're probably not tight on your standing barbell overhead press, as in you're not squeezing the glutes, your upper back is pretty loose, it would make sense why your Z press is the same. Alternatively, you might be overhead pressing with the bar way in front of your body, whereas when you Z press, it kind of forces you to use correct form. This is an exercise that teaches you how to shove your head through and press back. So the fact you're able to optimize your bar positioning better with a Z press might explain why the numbers are the same. But all things being equal, as in the same Z press position from the pins, same grip width, and using the same bar path, OHP should be way higher. So to me, there's definitely a form issue going on. I can't think of a muscular weakness that would cause an exercise that's naturally harder to be the same as one that's easier. That simply doesn't make any sense. So I hope you resonated with something that I said here. And of course, for anyone who's had this problem in the past, let's help a brother out. Share your feedback in the comments section. And with that said, we're done this Q&A video. If you got more questions or you want to be in the next one, post yours down below, and I'll see you around.